Nō reira, He Urunga Tū, an entrance to engagement. I'm not going to talk too much about how it was established or that it's whakapapa, tōna whakapapa, but what I will mention is that it did go to the World Indigenous Peoples Conference in Toronto, Canada in 2017. And it was the hope and intention that it would possibly be done again this year at the Whipsy in Auckland, since it was in our backyard. However, things didn't align, and so therefore we didn't get to do that. But just to have another opportunity to share how it's evolved or what is happening with it, is it still alive? And that space would be really beneficial for us as Ngā Pouwhirinaki. So during this section, both Sam and I are going to tag team and have a kōrero. I will introduce some of the kaupapa kōrero, and then he's going to share his experiences. Nō reira, Te Waharoa. And it's hononga also to that whakawhanaungatanga for He Pikorua underneath in the heading titles. I've aligned some of how it aligns to He Pikorua. So just for your information. Okay, so at the Waharoa, and we've all been standing there, and for us on our first day of term this year, we were all present at the Jace Williams PLD, which took place at one of the kura, and we were standing in the Waharoa. And we were all talking, having our conversations, but it needed to have one of our team members, and Eric, who coordinated everybody and sort of gave them a brief kōrero about what was to take place. And so this is the work before the work, and how we organise ourselves in order to prepare better to go on to enter into that pōhiri process. So when we're looking at the kura, the considerations is about our local and cultural knowledge. What do we already come with knowing in and about the culture? Also within the kura as well, the kura space that you're going into, and some of those key people and stakeholders. I'm going to hand it over to you, Sam, to have a kōrero about your experience.
Yeah, ka pai tēnā koe, Deb. I think with te Waharoa and whakawhanaungatanga, one of the things that probably the main thing I've learned is kanohi kitea, which is a really important part of tikanga Māori, being the seen face, kanohi kitea, making sure that once you have joined the school community, and I've learned this from kura kaupapa more than anywhere, is you're actually part of that community. You're not a 9 to 3, just a face every now and then. You become part of that community, like you probably felt like as a classroom teacher, but we can still do that as RTLB. We can't, it's not just come in for the formal mahi all the time. Sometimes we can rock up for, the end of year celebration, or community morning teas, or whatever, to be part of the community. So when I think of te Waharoa, the work before the work, and whakawhanaungatanga, kanohi kitea, being the seen face, being part of that community, is what I think of.
Well done. And it's the beginning of this new partnership that you're about to endeavour on. And so what that looks like. And so I'll just reference back all of the stuff that we have talked about previously in our PL webinars. It's an opportunity to situate all of that information and bring it forward to this moment, and that sharing. So what will take place is at the Waharoa, then everybody is organised and going in. Then you receive that karanga. And depending on that karanga will also depend on the nature of what your visit is going to be like. So we're going to go into the next slide. Te whakaeke. And this is the karanga's happening, and you're coming on. This is a part where kia matara means, be ready, and we're looking for the signs and the symbols. We're looking at the tangata whenua who are welcoming us in. For consideration, we'll be thinking about the wero, or what are the concerns that they are bringing from the school perspective, or that they are wanting to discuss with us. And then there's the looking at the ecology of the situation and thinking about all of those terms as well, physical, metaphysical, emotional, mental and social aspects. Over to you, Sam. Hei kōrero anō mau.
Yeah, Kapai, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that, especially that third bullet point is those intangibles. Sometimes we miss those in our mahi. We look for hard data, we look for measurable things, I suppose the tangible things, but it's so important to pay attention when building whakawhanaungatanga, especially in the context of He Urunga Tū, to look for the intangibles, the things that reside into our wairua. These we come with us. We have our ancestors with us. I mentioned my wife earlier, and I feel her with me every day in my mahi, but also in my whānau mahi, and listen and pay attention to those tohu or those signs, where people that aren't necessarily physically there with us are influencing and impacting situations, including ourselves. And so this is a huge part of the karanga, and also the whakaeke at a pōwhiri, but a massive part of our practices. RTLB is looking for those intangibles and noticing things beyond what we think are the only things that are real. So yeah, tēnā koe.
Koe. And to bring it back to, as practice leaders, how do we ensure that our team or our colleagues are best set up or best situated to participate, to engage safely? And it's about that safety for these situations. And so what do we do that currently promotes those sorts of things or gives them opportunity to talk about it, so that they can clarify things for themselves or have that opportunity? Nō reira, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou. Ko te wāhi o te whai kōrero. This is one of my favourite parts of the pōhiri process itself anyway. It's the opportunity that I draw on to hear kōrero. It's where whakatauki are put into context to embody kōrero, much like what we do, what we talk about. I know it's in reference to kohi, and I guess that's there was something that Sonia talks about in terms of some of the terms that are Dr. Sonia McFarlane, that talks about sometimes that's not the difficulty, but the situation with te reo Māori is that it has such different meanings sometimes. So kohi doesn't always just mean data gathering. It's not a literal translation. It's that opportunity for observation and that gathering and all those aspects. So the whai kōrero is that know me before you teach me. Ensuring that you're collecting that authentic voice sought from the mokopuna, the whānau, the kura and the hapori, and considering those cultural, academic and social strengths of those of that setting as well. It's a place where you, as that whakawhanaunga also takes place, because you're exchanging kōrero and you're really getting to know what motivates the intrinsics of others and also yourself. And sorry, lost my chain of thought at speaking out loud. But tēnā tukuna ki a koe, because obviously whai kōrero is in the pōhiri term, it was a male role, but in this instance where wahine are, we're also facilitating that mahi. So I'm just going to hand it over to Sam for this moment and have a hei wāhi kōrero mau, Sam.
Hi, ka pai, Deb. Yeah, I think when we talk about gathering voices or data, which, that soft data, I suppose it's being called as well, it's really important to recognize that there are power imbalances, and we'll talk a bit more about this as we go on. But there are some voices in our education system which are more privileged than others, and often those reside in the schools themselves, and schools don't realize often that they have this power or this privilege, more so than whānau do, and especially our mokopuna. And so that principle of mokopuna and whānau centered within He Urunga, for me, was one of the most transformational changes when He Urunga came in, was that principle, which existed in the ecological principle in our previous practice sequence and principles, but is more explicit now. So my sort of whakaaro around this is to try and elevate those voices, which are often marginalized and not as powerful as those in our schools. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Deb, when you were thinking about when you were talking about this, Mahi, and try to bring that power imbalance to more of an equal space, equity.
Koe Sam, I'm going to get you to talk just a little bit more. If you remember that kōrero we talked about impacting those, like as a tangata tiriti yourself, and that in the space where some Māori haven't quite, don't sort of, what was the word we used? Not practicing, say, or aren't aware of those things, or their capability is lesser that. So how do you... And we were talking about that's an opportunity to advocate for.
Ai, ka pai, yeah, it's a tricky space, especially as a tangata tiriti, as I am, and one of the worst type Australians. No, I think there are Māori we work with, whānau Māori, mokopuna Māori, who don't know that they're Māori, or don't know what it means for them yet to be Māori. There is no perfect Māori out there. There's no elite Māori, as some of our politicians like to say. There are people who are still, due to colonization and urbanization, was probably one of the most recent harmful things for Māori, have lost a lot of their cultural knowledge and reo, which is so important. Within the reo is the tikanga, is the culture. So I think what I would say is being careful, especially as a tangata tiriti, being careful when we're talking with whānau Māori about things Māori. Sometimes we can, what I've felt, I can whakaiti, I can lessen their mana if I come in speaking reo and talking about tikanga and sort of the things that they should know. It's important to not do that, and to have kia ngākau mahaki, be humble, listen, pay attention to those intangibles we've already spoken about, ask the right question at the right time, be curious and open-minded, and allow for what is already born within each Māori person as part of their birthright. Allow that to come out naturally and evoke it, not provoke it. And so it's something I've learned, and I've learned that mostly from my wahine, Sherilyn, definitely from her, how to do that. And so I've been privileged in that space, and I carry with me a lot of privilege as a white male, and I see it in my mahi, and whether in my time in Australia, but also here in New Zealand, I have that privilege. So I need to recognize that others aren't as fortunate, and need to have that humble heart. Kia ngākau mahaki. Yeah, ka pai. I hope that covered it, Deb. Did I cover it?
Sam, that was right on point, because it highlighted that we're all at different stages in our own capability, but it's okay to advocate for something or make suggestions, and still, because it may be that one thing that ignites someone's journey, as it will, you be the agent of change at that time for that person, that whānau member, that mokopuna, whomever that you're working with. And I know that because that also happened for me before. Like I said, I wasn't Dell speaking, and it was an auntie that said to me, if I told you were pronouncing, she said, If I told you were pronouncing where you were staying incorrectly, well, tell me where you're staying. And then we said, Opawanga. This is where we were living. And she said, if I told you that was said incorrectly and it was actually Opuawanga, you know, how did that make us feel? And well, we laughed. But, you know, I can remember that and we get to reflect on where our journey began. And so I remember that, but that was a starting point, is that when you make the turn from pronouncing something incorrectly to then start to think about, oh, what is that? Hukranui, Tikipanga, Whangarei, Wakapara. It starts opening up, oh gosh, we're saying all of the words incorrectly, which also gives it, and Fee, who talks about language matters. Just, you know, simple things like that we get those things right. And we've seen it before about, you know, pronouncing tamariki names correctly. So it's the little things that we can do, that we can continue to do and get better at ourselves, but also advocate in that space. But on to the next one. Kia ora, Sam. And ko tai, after all the kōrero has happened in the pōhiri process, we then come to a part where we have the hongi, or that connection. And up there you'll see the alignment to some of the other aspects of he pikorua. Ko au ko koe ko au. I am you and you are me. And we're in this part where we're sharing the breath and we're making an acknowledgement. And we've also come to an understanding of where we're at. We've had our kōrero, and now we're ready to, you know, finalise that and begin to co-construct a shared vision. And in this picture, so we've got our lovely, our former cluster manager, Rob, and the late Amatua Renata Tane in here, who was also part of He Urunga Tū, the kōrero back then, but you'll hear that at another time. And so, and then you move from the hongi and the hariru, and then you'll go in to have a kai and kai ngātahi, where you'll sit down and again in a less formal setting to be able to do a little bit more sharing, sort of like the icebreaker. Now you can begin to have other conversations. So he kōrero no tau, Sam, e pāna ki tēnei.
I think it's a tricky one in my thinking, but when I think of hongi and the kai ngātahi, this reminds me of the waharua again a little bit, where some of that that sort of coming together happens in more informal ways, I suppose. But I think of something that helps me in my practice is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if you do this part right, where you're actually, I guess, getting to know each other in a less formal way, and sharing the commonalities that we have as humans, then people will be more open to what you have to share, what you have to give, what koha you have to give, what weddle you have to lay down, what challenges that you present as well. And so that's what I think of really, is this is the part where manakitanga can be shown in a slightly different way. And in a more, I suppose, intimate way, where people feel that you actually really do care. And so I know we'll talk about manakitanga soon, but yeah, that a bit more soon. But yeah, that's what comes to my mind, Deb, in this part.
Yeah. No, ka pai. And also another couple of concepts that come into this space and for Te Taha Māori is the tapu and noa. And for us, the tapu space, I suppose, well, it's that whole process of before we get to the hongi, and the kai is the thing that whakanoa, that jingos. I didn't think too hard about how to explain what the noa is.
I think if I could say, like, one way that I had a reo Māori teacher of mine explain this really well that made sense to me as a tangata tiriti was tapu is there are restrictions in place, and noa means, or whakanoa is, we can be a bit more unrestricted now. So nice. Formal to informal, restricted to unrestricted. Kei te pai?
Yeah.
Kāra anō.
Pai. No. Pai. No reira, and then ki te whakawātea, tēnei wāhi o te mana motuhake, ka mua ka muri. We need to look back in order to go forward. This is kind of when you've come to that end, that final space, and we're probably more familiar with, you know, the case closure survey as such, as when you're getting that feedback. But ultimately achieving a peaceful pathway to a place for someone to transition, and that you've created now that partnership within that process, with those people that you can connect with in the future, say. Yeah. He kōrero anō tau e pāna ki tēnei, Sam.
I was thinking, you know, this is a Bible teaching, I suppose, is that treat others the way they want to be treated. Or you want to be what is it? Do unto others you'd have them do unto you, or treat others the way you'd want to be treated. I think we can go further than that in our mahi, and that is treat others the way they want to be treated. And I think that's what mana motahaki is about. Not everyone has the same vision for their life, or wants their life to go the same way that mine does. So if I go into a space and say, oh, your mana motihake looks like mine, that's not a good place to be. We need their mana motihake to be expressed in the way they want it expressed. And that includes our RTLB colleagues, that includes kaioko, whānau we work with, whoever. And so that's true partnership, is allowing someone else to blossom in their way. Not the way that we necessarily want them to. So they'll gather from us, as we do from others, things that we're like, oh yeah, I really resonate with that, and that'll happen. But I think there are times where, hey, you know, it's okay for them to grow in that different way. And kei te pai tērā, for me, that's what manu motaki is about.
Koe, Sam. That concludes the part going through each of the wāhanga. The next slide's from this point forward to our next breakout room, and we're just gonna touch on some things. You'll get shared the kōrero, but we sort of wanted to leave also you with a couple of, a bit more thinking. So He Urunga Tū is a shared language. Around the outside, you can see some, te reo me ona tikanga, the importance, language matters, having some awareness around and what those terms and concepts mean. I think, and we're going to go into manaakitanga a little bit there, but the tikanga and kawa, what do those things mean? Paranga and wero, tangata whenua and manuhiri. Having a really good understanding about some of these key concepts will also help you when you're processing how to go through that process of He Urunga Tū. Mana, that plays a big one, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Kaitiakitanga and manaakitanga. And the wā versus time. That one is just in and around that it takes as long as it takes, and you'll hear that all the time, but you will know that from the different experiences that you've been to. Sometimes it felt like it's taken longer, even though we're bound by restrictions, like what Sam talked about earlier. But that whole process does take as long as it takes. Otherwise, you'll know that if you don't do some certain things, or if it doesn't go the right way, there's often an issue that may arise coming out of that. So in amongst all of that, he aha te mea nui o te ao, mā koe ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. So always coming back to that. It's about people, and it's about how our interactions with them. I want to give a mihi out to mana potential and te ara whakamana. I haven't myself experienced te ara whakamana, but I know that mana potential, through that learning, they focus on this particular kaupapa to help bring about that shared language and shared understanding. And so you've got, when you're looking at that, that we have the potential as the practice leaders, as RTLB, as tangata, we have the potential to whakamana, whakanui, or whakaiti our mana based on how we interact with others. And I think it's important that we, and then there's also the part where they've got the whakaiti and back to the whakamana, where you're diminishing some sort of whakaiti has happened and back to the whakamana. And it's important to recognise that it's the re-entry or that rongoa, that healing that needs to take place in order to restore that situation. What else did I want? Sam, he kōrero tāpiri ki tēnā?
Yeah, I think you've mentioned really well, Deb. The only thing I would add is whakatika. And you did mention it, but whakatika is a really important way, meaning to correct a hapa, a wrong you've made. So it's important to whakatika in this part of this process, which is where you've got the whakati through to whakamana, and that's where that healing can take place. And to do it in a really genuine way, cultural, responsive, I guess, restorative practice would be what Angus McFarlane talks about with whakatika.
Sure. And it's and as leaders in our clusters, it's about ensuring that our colleagues also have the tools and capability to be able to do those things when they're, you know, in their situations as well, and ourselves, that we have ways in which we can do that as well to maintain and sustain relationships.
Aye.
So, Polly?
Ka pai.
Just keeping up the time, Sam. We can
Yeah. We got 9 minutes, eh?
Yes, and okay.
Kei te pai. Kei te pai. This really quickly, this just refers to, and I'm happy to share this with people outside of this, refers to that every Māori person is born with a birthright, and there are things that maintain or extend that birthright. And this is from the teachings, I suppose, of He Urunga Tū. And this is the historic research that shows what makes a Māori person a Māori person. Te ara tangata, what comprises a Māori person, what constitutes a Māori person. Ka pai. And we're looking at mana in particular, and this is what He Urunga Tū defines mana as. There are many definitions of mana, but in terms of within the birthright of a person, this is what he defines it as on the right-hand side there. So being the most changeable or adaptable part of a person, we talk about mana a lot for that reason. And it's that force within a person that makes them want to do good things for others.
The potential is a really great framework that sort of is built in and all around that, and promoting that, you know, and us supporting how that can happen for one.
Ka pai.
Hi. This was a little pullover from our last one, the partnership through a cultural lens, but we'll just continue on in terms of this one.
Ka pai. So manakitanga, we said we'd come back to this. So there are 4 parts of mana, and they're on the sides there: mana atua, mana tangata, mana whenua, mana tipuna. So where mana comes from, I guess, sources of mana, they come from people around us living into our marama. They come from atua, you know, rongonui and papatuanaku and tangaroa. If you go for the swim in the ocean, we can feel that mana in te tai ao, in the environment. And mana tipuna, I've mentioned this already, but those of our whānau and loved ones who are into our wairua, they're no longer here with us in te ao marama. And of course, mana whenua already really touched on. So these pictures are meant to show different ways people might respond if we acknowledge mana. And how do you say it, Deb? The mana aki. Can you explain that reo so beautifully that you have before?
Manaki.
Yeah.
You know, within the kupu, ko te mana he aki te tangata. So it's the uplifting. You know, we're always uplifting, nurturing, and supporting. And the manaki tanga is the doing of that. So te mana aki te tangata, o te manaakitanga ki te tangata.
Tino
And
pai. Mm,
yeah, just a
kapa.
little plug in there. At the moment, we're currently reviewing our cluster guidelines, etc. And one of the ones that I was tasked with was the induction. And so I've decided I've had a kōrero and I thought perhaps possibly how could we reframe that to be mahere manaaki tangata. You know, it resonates a lot better. It promotes the kupu, I don't know, as opposed to induction, which feels very, I don't, induction-y. But the manaaki, it sits well with me. And if we can promote that outside of the 9 to 5, that we are manaaki, we manaaki all the time and grow that aspect of ourselves. Ka pai,
Mm.
Sam, we're going to whip through to
All right,
a
haere
couple.
tonu.
That's haere tonu, just a kōrero anō i pāna ki tērā e te matua. We'll
Just
continue on.
centering the importance of manaakitanga under every tikanga. Mm.
Yeah.
Ka pai. And this is, I'm sure, familiar with the tika pono aroha, the evidence-based practice, or an indigenous version, Māori version of that same mahi. So he kia Sonia Rawa ko Angus McFarlane, mō tō Rawa mahi ki tēnei. Ka pai.
Right.
And that's brought up because in manaakitanga we exist within pono, within us in the professional world, I suppose. People who kaiako and PLs and RTLB we work with, we can consider this framework and someone's mana. We cannot empower someone else. We can only acknowledge their mana, and it is their acts of good service or good acts to others that uplift their mana. When we acknowledge those good acts of service, that is when their mana can be raised, or aki. Yeah, this is a very useful framework to consider how all the different ways in which we can acknowledge someone's mana.
Tēnā koe, Sam. And the same again with it in relation to the whānau and the aro ki te hā.
The aroha part of the framework we just looked at before from Angus and Sonia. Yep, ka pai. And that might look different for whānau, like we said earlier. Sometimes more work needs to be done in that space. Yep, ka pai.
Ka pai.
Yep. And these are just aspects of pōwhiri where, as Mason Jury talks about whakapiri in his whakapiri marama whakamana framework, which is very similar to He Urunga Tū and existed before it, and just some of the aspects we don't have time to go into right now, but around how to build and maintain positive relationships through those elements of pōwhiri. Ka pai.
Okay.
And these four elements, allowing time, respecting boundaries, and creating space and ways of knowing, those are the things that Mason Jury talks about that we need to give attention to. And Deb's already talked about time a little bit. And we talked about the boundaries, shifting from restricted to unrestricted, or formal to informal, and doing that dance. And that comes in the creating space and time as well. And the ways of knowing is just recognizing that we all think differently, and we all have a different way of seeing something, and allowing others to have that is really important. Before we share our way of knowing, sometimes seek first to understand, then to be understood. You know, that type of whakaro.